Emily stared at the flickering light filtering through the blinds, the soft hum of the evening settling over the house. At 18, life seemed to have slowed down during the summer break, leaving her with more time than she knew what to do with. Her dad, David, had just come back from a trip to visit his brother, but quickly left again to meet an old friend. Meanwhile, her mom was away on a lengthy business trip, leaving Emily to enjoy an unusual stillness in their usually bustling home. Finally, some alone time, she whispered with a hint of excitement. The moment her dad's car disappeared down the street, Emily locked the door, kicked off her sneakers, and slipped into her cozy pajamas. She grabbed a cold soda, plopped onto the living room couch, and fired up her laptop. The house was hers, and she was ready to indulge in the endless distractions of the internet. The faint glow of her screen lit up the room, a sanctuary of solitude she hadn't realized she craved so much. Hours passed unnoticed as Emily lost herself in a rabbit hole of online entertainment, her headphones cocooning her in a world far from the quiet house around her. But just as she felt completely at ease, a voice cut through the stillness like a lightning bolt. "Emily, what in heaven's name do you think you're doing?" Her dad's sharp tone sent her heart racing, and she yanked off her headphones, frozen in place. She hadn't heard him come in. There he stood in the doorway, his face a mix of disbelief and something Emily couldn't quite place. "I didn't think you'd be back so soon," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. David's eyes softened, but he said nothing, turning on his heel and leaving as quickly as he'd appeared. The sound of the door closing echoed through the silence, leaving Emily alone with her pounding heartbeat and a deep sense of unease. Dinner that evening was a painful silence, broken only by the clink of forks against plates. Emily wanted to apologize, to say something, anything, but the words stuck in her throat. Her dad's expression was unreadable, his gaze fixed on his plate. After what felt like an eternity, he finally spoke, his voice calm but measured. "Emily, we need to talk about this, but not tonight. Let's just finish dinner." That was it. No yelling, no lectures, just an unspoken tension that hung in the air like a storm cloud waiting to burst. Later, as Emily lay in bed, she replayed the moment in her mind, over and over, wondering what her dad was thinking and why he hadn't reacted more strongly. The following days felt different. David seemed distant yet watchful, his actions carrying an unspoken weight. Emily, unsure of how to navigate this new dynamic, found herself walking on eggshells, torn between her guilt and the strange sense that something deeper was shifting between them. The days following that awkward evening passed in a haze of unspoken words. Emily couldn't shake the tension that now seemed to linger in every corner of the house. Her dad's behavior felt different, subtle but noticeable. He wasn't avoiding her, exactly, but there was a weight to his movements, a quiet thoughtfulness in his tone that hadn't been there before. Emily tried to bury herself in her usual distractions, but even her favorite shows couldn't pull her attention away for long. Every time she saw her dad, sitting silently with his coffee or flipping through the channels aimlessly, she felt the same pang of unease. What was he thinking? Why hadn't he just yelled or scolded her and gotten it over with? The quiet understanding he'd shown was almost harder to deal with than anger. One evening, Emily found herself in the kitchen, pouring a glass of water, when she heard her dad clear his throat behind her. She jumped, nearly spilling the glass. "Sorry, didn't mean to scare you," he said with a faint smile, but his eyes didn't quite meet hers. "It's okay," she muttered, setting the glass down, her fingers nervously tracing the countertop. He hesitated, as though searching for the right words. "Emily, about the other night." Her stomach tightened, and she looked up at him cautiously. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry if I made you feel uncomfortable. I reacted poorly. I should have handled it better." His voice was calm, measured, but she could hear the hint of awkwardness in his tone. Emily blinked, taken aback. She hadn't expected this, an apology? "No, Dad, you don't need to apologize. I mean, it was my fault. I didn't think you'd be home so early and—" "Stop," he interrupted gently, raising a hand. "You don't need to explain yourself. You're 18 now. You're figuring things out, and that's okay. I guess I didn't realize how much you've grown up until now." Her heart twisted at his words. There was something almost sad in the way he said it, like he was grappling with the fact that she wasn't a little girl anymore. They stood there in silence for a moment, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the room. Then, with a sigh, he said, "Let's just agree to be more mindful of each other's space, okay?" Emily nodded quickly. "Yeah, of course. Totally." He gave her a small, reassuring smile before retreating to the living room. Emily stayed in the kitchen for a while longer, staring at the glass of water she no longer wanted. That night, as she lay in bed, she couldn't stop thinking about the conversation. Her dad's words had been kind, understanding even, but they left her feeling more unsettled than ever. Was he really okay with how things had unfolded? Or was there something else he wasn't saying? The dynamic between them had shifted, and Emily could feel it in every interaction. It wasn't bad, exactly, but it was unfamiliar, uncharted territory she wasn't sure how to navigate. The unease in the house didn't fade, it grew. Every glance, every word between Emily and her dad felt heavy with meaning, even if neither of them said anything directly. It was as though they were both tiptoeing around something unspoken, careful not to shatter the fragile balance they'd managed to find. Emily tried to go about her days as if everything was normal, but deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that things weren't. Not really. One afternoon, as Emily sat in the living room scrolling through her phone, her dad entered quietly, a cup of tea in his hands. She glanced up, forcing a small smile. "Hey," she said softly. "Hey," he replied, sitting on the chair across from her. He seemed to hesitate before adding, "I've been thinking about what we talked about the other night." Emily's heart skipped a beat. She set her phone down, suddenly feeling very aware of the space between them. "Oh? What about it?" Her dad took a sip of tea, his gaze steady but distant. I realized how much I've been away. With work, your mom traveling, and everything else, I've missed a lot. And I don't want you to feel like you're going through things alone." Emily frowned, caught off guard by his honesty. "Dad, you don't have to." "I know," he interrupted, his voice firmer now. "But I want to. You're my daughter, Emily. And I don't want to be the kind of parent who's too busy or distracted to notice when something's wrong." The words hit her harder than she expected. She hadn't even realized how much she'd been holding in, the confusion, the tension, the questions swirling in her mind since that awkward evening. "It's not that I don't want to talk to you," she said carefully, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's just some things are hard to explain." Her dad nodded slowly, as though he understood more than she was saying. "I get that. And I don't want to push you. But if there's ever something you need to talk about, I'm here. No judgment, okay?" Emily managed a weak smile, her chest tight with emotion. "Thanks, Dad." For a moment, it felt like the air between them had cleared slightly. But the relief was short-lived. That evening, while Emily was finishing dinner, she overheard her dad on the phone in the next room. His voice was low, serious, but she caught enough to make her pause. "No, I haven't told her. I don't think it's the right time. I just don't want to upset her any more than she already is." Emily froze, her fork hovering in midair. Who was he talking to? And what was he keeping from her? Her mind raced with possibilities, each one more unsettling than the last. She waited until he hung up, but when he walked into the kitchen moments later, his expression was calm, almost too calm. "You okay, Em?" he asked, his tone casual. "Yeah," she replied quickly, forcing herself to sound normal. But inside, she was anything but. Whatever her dad was hiding, she was determined to find out. Emily couldn't let the conversation she overheard go. It played on a loop in her mind, each word sinking deeper, twisting her thoughts. Who had her dad been talking to? What was he hiding? The air in the house, already heavy with unresolved tension, felt stifling now. She wanted to ask him directly, to demand answers, but something held her back. Fear, maybe, or a sense that she wasn't ready to hear the truth. Over the next few days, Emily watched her dad more closely than ever. Every move he made, every glance in her direction seemed charged with meaning. He was careful, almost too careful, like he was tiptoeing around her. It only made her more suspicious. And then one night, she found her opportunity. David had gone to bed early, something he rarely did. The house was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. Emily crept downstairs, her heart pounding, and made her way to the small desk in the living room where her dad usually kept his laptop and paperwork. She knew it was a risk, but she couldn't shake the feeling that the answers she needed were somewhere in there. Her fingers trembled as she opened the laptop. The screen lit up, asking for a password. Emily hesitated. She almost gave up right then, but her curiosity pushed her forward. After a few failed attempts, she tried something simple, her mom's name. The screen unlocked, and she let out a shaky breath. Scrolling through the files, she didn't find anything unusual at first. Work documents, bills, photos. But then she spotted a folder tucked away in the corner of the desktop, labeled with a date. It was from a few weeks ago, just before her mom's trip. Something about it made her pause. She clicked it open, and her heart sank. Inside were emails, text screenshots, and even photos, all related to someone Emily didn't recognize. The messages were vague but pointed, referencing meetups and plans that didn't involve her mom. Her stomach churned as she pieced together the implications. Before she could dive deeper, a voice broke the silence. "Emily?" She jumped, slamming the laptop shut and spinning around. Her dad stood in the doorway, his face a mixture of confusion and disappointment. "What are you doing?" he asked, his tone calm but sharp enough to send a chill down her spine. I couldn't sleep," she stammered, trying to think of an excuse. "I thought I'd check something." He didn't move, his eyes locked on hers. "Emily, that's my laptop." "I know," she admitted, her voice shaking. "But I heard you on the phone the other night, and you've been acting so weird. I needed to know what's going on." His jaw tightened, and for a moment, Emily thought he was going to yell. But instead, he sighed deeply and sat down on the couch, rubbing his temples. "There are things you don't understand, Emily," he said finally, his voice heavy. "Then explain them to me," she demanded, her frustration boiling over.
"What are you hiding, Dad?"
"Is it about Mom?" David looked at her, his expression unreadable. The pause that followed was unbearable, the silence stretching like a chasm between them. And then he said something that made Emily's world tilt. "It's not about your mom," he said quietly. "It's about us." Emily froze, her mind racing. Us? What did that even mean? The room felt like it was spinning as she waited for him to explain, but he just sat there, his face pale and his hands clenched. Whatever he was about to say, she knew it would change everything. Emily's breath caught in her throat as her father's words hung in the air. "What do you mean, us?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. Her dad didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked down at his hands, fidgeting in a way she'd never seen before. The man who always seemed so composed, so in control, now looked almost vulnerable. "I wasn't sure if I should tell you," he said finally, his voice low. "But I think you deserve the truth. You've noticed things have been different lately, how I've been acting, what I've been hiding." He paused, meeting her gaze. "It's because I've been trying to protect you." "Protect me? From what?" Emily's frustration was boiling over now. "Dad, you're not making any sense. Just tell me what's going on." He took a deep breath, as if bracing himself. "There's someone I've been seeing. It's not what you think," he added quickly when Emily's eyes widened. "It's not an affair. I haven't betrayed your mom." "Then who is it?" Emily demanded, her voice trembling. "It's a private investigator," he admitted, the words tumbling out. Emily froze, completely blindsided. "I hired them because I suspected someone was watching us. I didn't want to scare you or your mom, so I kept it quiet." Emily's mind was racing, trying to process what he was saying. "Watching us?
Why?"
Who would do that?" David leaned forward, his expression serious. "I don't know yet. That's what I was trying to figure out. It started a few months ago, little things at first. A car parked down the street for hours. Strange phone calls. I didn't think much of it, but then I found a note." "A note?" Emily's voice was barely audible. Her dad nodded. "It was left in the mailbox. No name, no signature, just a message, keep your family close. Not everyone has good intentions. I didn't want to alarm your mom, so I decided to handle it myself. But the more I looked into it, the stranger it got. Emily's pulse was racing. Why didn't you tell me? Or Mom? We could have helped. I didn't want to put you in danger, he said firmly. The less you knew, the safer you were. Emily's mind spun with questions, but before she could ask another, the sound of a car engine outside made them both freeze. David's face hardened, and he motioned for her to stay put. He walked to the window, carefully peeking through the blinds. Is it them? Emily whispered, her heart pounding in her chest. David didn't answer. Instead, he grabbed his phone and dialed a number. They're here, he said quietly into the phone. Just like you said they would be. Emily's stomach flipped. Who are you calling? What's happening? Before David could respond, there was a sharp knock at the door. Emily's blood ran cold. Her dad turned to her, his face a mix of fear and determination. No matter what happens, stay behind me, he said. The door creaked open, and standing on the porch was someone Emily never expected to see. Mom, she gasped. But the look in her mother's eyes wasn't one of relief or love. It was something darker, something Emily had never seen before. Emily's mind spun as she stared at her mom standing in the doorway. This wasn't the warm, familiar presence she had always known. Her mother's expression was cold, calculating, her eyes flickering briefly to David before landing on Emily. For a moment, the tension was suffocating, the silence stretching unbearably. Mom. Emily's voice was trembling. What's going on? Why are you here? Her mother stepped inside, her movements deliberate, as if she was sizing up the room. David shifted protectively in front of Emily, his body tense. Catherine, he said, his tone low and wary. What are you doing back early? Catherine let out a hollow laugh, her gaze never leaving David. Early? I'd say it's right on time. Did you really think I wouldn't find out what you've been doing behind my back? What are you talking about? Emily blurted, her voice cracking. What's happening? Catherine's eyes softened momentarily as she looked at her daughter. Sweetheart, you deserve to know the truth. Your father hasn't been honest with you, or with me. He's been meddling in things that don't concern him. That's enough, Catherine, David snapped, his voice firm but laced with unease. Emily doesn't need to be dragged into this. But Emily had had enough of the secrets, the half-truths. No, she shouted, her voice breaking through the rising tension. I'm tired of being kept in the dark. Someone needs to tell me what's going on right now. Catherine's lips pressed into a thin line before she spoke. Your father has been investigating me. He hired someone to dig into my personal life, all because he couldn't trust me. Emily's heart sank as she looked at her dad. Is that true? David's shoulders slumped, and he sighed deeply. I wasn't investigating your mother, he said carefully. I was trying to protect us. Someone's been watching us, leaving messages. I thought. You thought it was me, Catherine interjected, her voice sharp. You thought I'd betray my own families? David didn't respond, but the guilt in his eyes said enough. Emily felt like the ground was shifting beneath her. So, you both lied, she asked, her voice cracking. Mom, Dad, what's wrong with us? Catherine took a step closer, her face softening. Emily, I never wanted you to be caught in the middle of this. But your father's paranoia. Don't. David interrupted, his voice firm. This isn't about paranoia. It's about keeping our families safe. The conversation froze as another knock sounded at the door. All three of them turned to the sound, the tension thick in the air. David hesitated before opening it, revealing a man in a dark suit. Mr. Hayes, the man said calmly. I think it's time we all had a conversation. The hours that followed were a blur of revelations. The man was from the private investigators firm, confirming that the threats against the family were real. Catherine, despite David's suspicions, was innocent of any wrongdoing but had grown distant due to his secrecy. By the end of the night, the family sat together in the living room, the weight of their misunderstandings pressing down on them. We have to do better, Emily said softly, breaking the silence. We can't keep hiding things from each other. David nodded, his expression weary. You're right. No more secrets. Catherine reached for Emily's hand, her grip firm. We'll fix this, Emily. As a family, the words were tentative but sincere, and for the first time in weeks, Emily felt a glimmer of hope. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but they were finally ready to face it together.